Hi everyone, I'm Ellie from Ellie's Exotics, and today we're going to be talking all about Woma pythons. Woma pythons are my favourite species of snake. They make amazing pets, so I thought I would go through their care and their husbandry today so that you can learn all about them in case you ever wanted to get one yourself. Woma pythons are incredibly hard to research. There is very little information on them, so this is all information that I have gathered over the last year from breeders, from meetings, from Discord calls, from scientific studies, from multiple different care guides. There's going to be a lot of information in this video compared to some of the other care guides you might see on YouTube, which are now incredibly outdated and actually probably isn't the best way to take care of your snakes. So here is a 2024 Woma python care guide. Let's get right into it. Let's start out with temperament. How is your Woma python going to act? Woma pythons are very slow, docile and calculated in the way that they move. They can be extremely good pets because they're easy to handle. They get to a good size, so usually up to 6 foot. Sometimes they can get bigger. If you have a female, you're looking at more 7 to 8 foot. But they get to a good handleable size, and they really do seem to enjoy coming out and interacting with their owner. Bicky definitely chooses to be handled. He likes to explore and see everything that's going on. Now, the thing that puts people off with Woma pythons is their food response. They have a very high food response and they love to eat. Now, for me, I love that, and there are ways to combat that. But for a new snake owner, it might be a little bit intimidating. I would say their food response is like Kiki's behind me, my corn snake. But I will say, compared to my corn snake, he's probably not as dramatic. So he won't, properly coil around their food like my corn snake does. He won't swing his food around the enclosure, but that can just be an individual thing with snakes. That can just be his personality. But when you're handling your Woma python, always use a hook just to bring them out of their enclosure. Choice-based handling works for a lot of different species, but for a snake with a real high food drive, choice-based handling can be difficult and you may get bitten every now and then. So I recommend just going into the enclosure, using a hook, scooping them up, and then putting them into your hands. That hook immediately, when it touches their body, will let them know it's not food time anymore and it's time to be handled and to come out and be stimulated by their environment and to be nice and relaxed and not think about rats all the time. So let's talk about housing next. So the minimum enclosure for a Woma python is a 6 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot enclosure. So these two behind me are 4 by 2 by 2s, and Bicky is currently in a 4 by 2 by 2 because he's only about 2 foot long. So you can keep babies or juveniles in either a 3 by 2 by 2 or a 4 by 2 by 2, or until they are at least as long as their enclosure. Now, with some snake species like royal pythons, putting a baby into an adult enclosure can be quite stressful for them. You don't really have to worry about that with Woma pythons. Woma pythons are pretty confident animals and they will utilize all of their enclosure space. So you can put them straight into a 6 by 2 by 2 as long as there's no way for them to escape. They can be a little bit crafty, so just make sure that all your vents are properly secured and maybe even silicone them in place. Because Woma pythons need higher temperatures, which I'll talk about in a little bit, you're going to have a better time with either a PVC or a wooden enclosure. Glass enclosures can be good, but when it's really cold, they get very cold, and when it's too hot, they get really hot. So I don't really recommend glass enclosures for really high temperatured animals like Woma pythons. Go for something that has blacked out sides, a blacked out top, and just a glass front so that it traps heat and keeps heat in well, but it also doesn't overheat. Inside of your enclosure, you are going to want to provide lots of clutter. I have 4 hides in there as well, so he's got multiple opportunities to go and hide himself away and bask in different areas with different temperatures. But providing lots of clutter will make your snake feel nice and comfortable when they're moving throughout their enclosure. So Woma pythons in the wild can actually travel miles and miles and miles a day. So having little open areas where they can properly stretch out, but with areas where they can hide away, creates a perfect environment when they're moving around their cage. Make sure your Woma python has climbing opportunities as well. They will climb. They are not an arboreal species, but they will absolutely use any type of climbing opportunity that you give them. If you wanted to give them lots of climbing space and go for, let's say, a 6x3x2, they would absolutely use it. Giving them different platforms, different levels, or even long, high branches is great stimulation for your Woma python and will really get their mind working. For the substrate inside of the enclosure, I personally like to go for an organic topsoil and play sand mix. I get both of these things from Wix, but you can also get the Westlands topsoil as well. That is safe. For my American or Australian watchers out there, I am really sorry. I don't know the particular brands that you guys can use, but I'm sure that if you do a little bit of research into it, you will find which ones are safe. Please don't use calcium sand or reptile sand inside of your enclosure, as these things can cause impaction if you're not using the correct lighting. I like play sand because it is fully digestible, it doesn't clump in the stomach, and it creates a natural texture when your snake is moving around on it. Aspen is also commonly used for Woma pythons, but I wouldn't really recommend this either. Aspen can cause issues around the mouth, it can cause respiratory problems, and it does mold when it gets wet. With Woma pythons, you want them to have a humidity boost every now and then, so aspen just isn't really something that would work for them, as it allows you to pretty much never spray down the enclosure, which isn't really natural for any species of reptile. Even for your arid species, a misting every now and then is not going to harm them, so stay far away from things like aspen and also lignocell as well. Eco-earth is also commonly talked about, but for arid species there is absolutely no reason to be using it. Eco-earth is very, very dry and dusty when it is not wet, and that can get stuck inside of the snake's heat pits, because Womas do have them. They have one underneath the tip of their nose, or it can even get stuck around their mouth, around their eyes, and it can also cause respiratory problems as well. If you ever use Eco-earth for any of your reptiles, I recommend mixing in about 20% into your topsoil and play sand mix, and never really use more than that, just so that you don't have any issues of swelling and shrinking in the stomach, causing digestive problems. So yes, topsoil and play sand is the best substrate to go for. You're going to want to give them about 4 to 6 inches of this so that they can burrow. Bicky doesn't really burrow too much, but every snake is different and yours might love to go underneath the ground. It's always nice to give them that opportunity too. Now let's get into heating and UVB. This is a very, very controversial topic and I have very controversial opinions about it. So let's get into that. So for heat, the best bulb on the market at the moment is the Reptile Systems Eco Halogen 100 watt bulb. I'll put a photo of it here. That is the best bulb on the market. I'll show you right here what their output looks like compared to something like a standard halogen bulb that is being sold at the moment, because halogens are becoming a lot more popular, but not all of them work the same. Go for a bulb brand that is reliable. So I'm currently trying to switch all of my bulbs over to the Eco Halogen by Reptile Systems, but if that is something that is out of your budget, as they are a little bit pricier to buy the kit, then the Exoterra Intense Basking Bulb is also pretty good as well. I highly recommend that one, but I would probably stay away from things like the Arcadia Halogen Bulb, as they have a really strong and direct output, and they would have to be fitted about 4 foot over your basking spot for your snake to actually get the benefits from them. So I'm sorry, Arcadia, I do love you, but there are a lot of other good halogen bulbs out on the market at the moment. A lot of people ask about ceramic heat emitters and also deep heat projectors. I have very controversial opinions about these too. Ceramic heat emitters are brilliant. when they are not used on their own and they are only used for purposes like heating your enclosure at night time. Ceramic heat emitters produce a surface level heat. They are basically a substrate warmer. They are not going to allow your snake to properly digest their food. And the same thing goes for deep heat projectors. Deep heat projectors are not advertised the right way, and they pretty much only produce IRC heat, which is the equivalent of something like a heat mat. So ceramic heat emitters, deep heat projectors, and heat mats too are not adequate for reptiles, especially like snakes that eat whole prey. They need a good heating source to be able to break that prey item down. So temperature wise, you want a gradient, you want a warm side and a cool side. I like to put all my heat bulbs on the right side of the enclosure, so I'm just going to refer to the right and the left, okay? So on the right side of the enclosure, you want a basking temperature of around 33 degrees. This can go up and it also can go down a little bit, but staying within the 30 to 35 range is what's best. Use a temperature gun to be able to see what temperature the basking surface is, and use a thermometer to be able to see what the ambient temperature is, so that you know that your snake is getting what it needs. Connect your heat to a thermostat and place this a couple of inches away from the basking spot. Usually I like to slip this underneath a hide and have it poking out a little bit so that my snakes can't move it around, but having it around your basking area will make sure that you get those good readings and that you know that your temperatures are where they need to be. For your left hand side or your cool side, you want it to be between 24 to 26 degrees Celsius. If your enclosure is, let's say, a 7-foot or an 8-foot enclosure, then you can fit a ceramic heat emitter to the cool side and fit another thermostat to that as well, just so that it's not getting too cold on the cold side. Nighttime temperatures shouldn't drop below 22 degrees Celsius, and if they do, then you can fit a ceramic heat emitter, like I said, to the other side of the enclosure, or you can fit it next to your basking bulb like I've done with Miso's enclosure.
Editing Ellie here. I forgot to talk about UVB. So Woma pythons are a Ferguson Zone 1 animal. So the UVB percentage that you're going to be looking at is about 7%, which means that the Arcadia Shade Dweller unit is perfect for them. Please make sure that you do have your UVB. You'll see so many benefits from it, like coloration, their shedding will be better. If you have a female that you aren't breeding, their egg absorption will be better, their bone density will be better. UVB is chef's kiss, so make sure you add that to your shopping list. Okay, now back onto the main video.
Now let's talk a little bit about humidity. So Woma pythons are from Central and Western Australia. It's very hot and it's very dry, but they do get occasional rainfall. So you're not looking at 20-30% humidity. Your humidity should sit around 60 up to 70%. And then when they look like they're going into shed, which isn't always too obvious with Woma pythons that I found, Bicky can be pretty sneaky about his shedding, then you can also bump it up to 80 just for a couple of days, but never really go over that 80 mark. It's not a tropical environment, and never really go below 50% so that it's too dry for them. Between 50 to 70 is a good range. I keep mine personally at about 60%, and that works perfectly for Bicky. Now let's talk all about feeding. So Woma pythons in the wild, they will use their flat body to pin their prey up against the sides of burrows. They are prone to obesity, and if they are overweight, then that means that they can't display naturalistic behaviors like doing the pinning action. So I recommend feeding your snake small but regular meals. Bicky eats once a week, and his prey item is only about this big. Like I said, he's only 2 foot long, so remember that. But he eats a very small prey item compared to what he probably could eat, and this just prevents any obesity. Your Woma python should be either flat as a juvenile or more triangular as an adult. They should never look round like a royal python. But yes, in the wild they will eat things things like rodents, other snakes, they will eat birds, they will eat lizards. So providing a good variety of prey items is brilliant for Woma pythons, and it's great for their digestional tract. So feeding things like a chick every now and then, or a quail, or I'm pretty sure Reptilinks does iguana meat as well. It's like always sold out, and I've been trying to get them for Bicky for ages. Would be great for something like a Woma python. It's natural for them. Their bodies are made to break down that type of food. So give it a go. Now, like I said, I feed Bicky every week. When you get into adulthood, I would probably feed every 10 to 14 days, especially when they're starting to hit that 10-year-old, 12-year-old mark, because their metabolism will slow right down. So yeah, small prey items regularly. And the last topic is availability. Woma pythons are incredibly difficult to get your hands on. You could pay anywhere from £100 to £500, £600, £700 for a Woma python. It really depends if you get one of those fancy morphs, which are really hard to come by, or whether you are going for a proven female breeder or a teeny tiny baby male, which is what I did. So Bicky was £250, which I think is pretty average, pretty standard for a Woma python. So I would say that's the sort of price range that you're going to be looking at. Now, because in 1982 Australia banned any native animals being imported or exported, all Woma pythons are captive breds. You're not going to find any wild caught Woma pythons. It's not a thing, and if you find one, probably tell the authorities, because that shouldn't be in the UK. So majority of the Woma pythons you're going to come across are going to thrive in captivity. They need to be bred way more often because they are critically endangered, and because we can't import or export them, the bloodlines are getting weaker and weaker. So having a Woma python as a pet and breeding them could do good for the species, but make sure before you go into breeding you know exactly what you're doing, and that you've kept them for many years, and you know what you're going to do if people don't buy the babies. Okay, and that is all about Woma pythons. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I'd be happy to answer, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Make sure you like and you subscribe, and I will see you all later. Bye bye. If you would like to read more about Woma pythons, I wrote an article for Pip and Friends monthly newsletter. There's a link in the description. Go subscribe and go have a read.